Chapter 1. My Story. A story of faith turning to sight is often not a story of overnight success. In fact, it's most likely that the journey to your happily ever after will consist of some struggling along the way. There may even be times when you feel darkness all around you as you anticipate by faith seeing the radiant light of day, the time when what you've asked God and trusted Him for finally comes to pass. Just as a seed planted deep into the soil of the earth must take firm root and then struggle to wind its way upward through the dark, so many of our victories in life are about the process, the journey. Jesus said, "Most assuredly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain." John 12, verse 24. How true this becomes in our lives when we finally make the decision to bear peaceable fruits of righteousness, where there has been desolation or very little fruit. We come to realize that we must die to doing things the same unhealthy way we've been doing them. Those old ways of doing things might include a pattern of trying to control others so we can feel a measure of comfort ourselves, or it might require us to return our gaze toward Jesus when we looked away and have fixed our focus on someone else to help us. As long as these patterns are allowed to influence our lives and our relationships, our brokenness will remain undealt with and unsubmitted to Jesus' cross and His resurrection life. And nothing good of eternal value can come out of that. Jesus, the Word of God who was made flesh, was buried as a seed for 3 days, but He rose from the dead, bringing us to new life with Him. Because of His great sacrifice and act of redemption, we can take His Word into our lives and allow Him to bring forth from the darkness something new that never existed before. Whether it's healing from our brokenness, deliverance from our shame, or freedom to love without fear, God's Word and His Spirit are powerful to transform our lives and to do in us what we could not possibly do for ourselves. That is my story. Yes, it's one of pain and struggle, but it's also one of great fruitfulness. Although your story is no doubt different than mine, perhaps you will see hidden in these pages a similar picture of yourself as you face your own unique challenges. If you do, I pray you find the courage you need to pursue God's path of victory for you and your own journey of happily ever after. Often, women set themselves up for failure from the very beginning of their married lives because they want their relationship with the man they love to meet the needs of their heart that only Jesus can provide. Psalm 18, verses 1 and 2 says, "I will love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My God, my strength in whom I will trust, my shield, and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold." Notice, verse 2 doesn't say, "My husband is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my strength, my shield, the horn of my salvation, and my stronghold." Phew, that would be a lot of responsibility for one man's shoulders. As wonderful as our husband might be, his shoulders are simply not that big. And our false expectation that he can meet our every need sets us up for undue disappointment. Our journey of growth that leads to a deeply fulfilling relationship with our husband always places Jesus firmly at the center of the marriage. Jesus is our rock and fortress. Only Him. When we enter marriage with all our imperfections and insecurities, we have an opportunity to allow God to lead us to a place of security in Jesus, rather than try to gain that security from our husband. Shortly after moving to the former Soviet Union to launch a new phase of our ministry, I began the struggle of my life with my emotions. Engrossed with everything that comes with embarking on a new assignment from God, Rick quickly poured himself into the work we had come to do. I started and directed the praise and worship of our church, which included about 30 people. I helped Rick in the TV ministry, and I was blessed to be the stay-at-home mom of 3 wonderful little boys whom I even homeschooled for a time. I was engaged in helping in the ministry and in serving by Rick's side. But as his responsibilities and vision kept increasing, I began to fear that I was losing the place in my husband's heart that belonged to me as his wife, and I became resentful. The vision that Rick carried in his heart at that time would prove to have a vast impact on that entire region of the world. But it took an enormous amount of time and attention as the foundation was being laid in those early days. To get the job done and fulfill that phase of the call, Rick had to intently focus not only on constructing a physical church building in Riga, the capital city of Latvia, but also on raising up church leaders and developing the foundation of what was to become a huge ministry. I began to harbor feelings of resentment and unforgiveness toward him because I felt so left out of his life. Before I knew it, my negative feelings had so consumed me that I began to experience some troubling symptoms in my body. At times, my hands and feet would go almost completely numb. Also, my unforgiveness opened the door to a great deal of fear in my life, including panic attacks at times. I remember thinking to myself, I'm a Christian. This is not supposed to be happening to me. After much time spent genuinely seeking God in prayer, I came to the difficult but life-changing realization that although my emotions were directed toward my husband, I was the source of my own bitterness and frustration. As women, we have great hopes for a marriage that's always peaceful and happy, but often life brings just the right circumstances that cause us to see in full color some of the ugliness inside us that disrupts that happiness and peace. When we feel vulnerable and become needy toward others, that hidden ugliness floats right up to the surface. Although we want to escape from our issues, if we don't bring them to God and find His way of escape, they will continue to raise their ugly heads again and again. Often, it's in our desperation that we discover the truth that our only real means of escape and freedom are found in God, through turning to Him and sincerely seeking His face. James 4 verse 8 says, "Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you." Only when we draw near to God will we find the true security we desire, that no person can provide for us, no matter how hard he or she may try. As I struggled with all those negative emotions concerning Rick and our marriage, I was in a desperate place to draw near to God. I really needed Him to draw near to me because I knew that when God draws near, He doesn't come empty-handed. He comes with power, grace, and the answers we seek. I want to share with you a little bit about how traps are set to capture our lives. Traps designed to bind us up and keep us bound so that we fail to find joy and fulfillment on the path God has called us to walk and in the life He's called us to live. Just as a trap designed to catch a wild animal is usually hidden from sight, the traps the enemy sets for us are not always obvious. They often start as one small thought, feeling, or suggestion that can seem very good, right, and reasonable at first, especially if we feel someone has wronged us in some way or that life's circumstances have been unkind and unfair. In times like these, it's so easy to begin feeling sorry for ourselves. And it's in those weak moments the enemy moves in with negative thoughts that serve no purpose other than to keep us stuck in that one place, unable to move forward. That's what happened to me when we moved to the former Soviet Union. Because Rick was so focused on fulfilling the vision God had given him for our ministry as he needed to be, I didn't feel I was as important to him as the people he had to give time and attention to in those early days. I felt as though I had been left on the side of the road. In fact, that's how my lonely road of isolation and despair began, with one negative feeling. Perhaps you felt that way before, like your husband is loaded down with responsibilities and you're just another one of those many responsibilities. Maybe you feel like just another spinning plate among many that your husband has to deal with so that everything doesn't come crashing down around him. If you lived in a perfect world, Your husband could do it all and still love you the way you think he should, but it's not a perfect world. And sometimes in marriage, there will be seasons when he has more than his fair share of responsibilities and problems to deal with in his job or vocation. I want to encourage you that more than likely, your husband is doing the best he can and probably feels overwhelmed at times because of all the things that clamor for his attention. During the times when we're vulnerable and afraid, and even when we feel like lashing out in anger, it's Jesus, not our husband, whom we need more than ever. We need the master artist to paint on the canvas of our soul the answers and instructions we need to take us through our journey without becoming self-focused and believing the wrong things. That kind of inward focus and wrong believing will bring us to the wrong conclusions, paint a wrong picture on our soul, and eventually destroy us emotionally. That's why we have to recognize that Jesus is our rock, fortress, deliverer, and strength. We can safely draw near to him. We can put our trust in him. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." Of course, I knew this passage when I began struggling with wrong feelings and emotions toward my husband, but I didn't have the wisdom I needed at that time to put into practice what I'm describing here. Instead, I nurtured hurt feelings, believed wrong thoughts, and became very isolated and discouraged, trapped as a result. What happened to me during those long months of struggling emotionally was no one's fault but my own. I not only fell into the trap of nurturing wrong thoughts and feelings, but I also failed to do the things necessary to avoid being isolated. I didn't speak the Russian language very well. I could have spent more time learning it, but I made excuses for not studying. I didn't have any friends, but I could have been bolder and less fearful to step out of my comfort zone and speak the little Russian I had learned so that I could meet people and get to know them better. You may ask, "Denise, how could you do that? How could you allow all that to happen?" Although I faced an onslaught of negative emotions during this time of transition in ministry, I wasn't fully aware at each moment that I was responding so poorly. Each negative response that caused me to plunge deeper and deeper in despair was very subtle. I didn't notice right away what was happening as I shrunk away in isolation, resentment, unforgiveness, and shame. Have you ever isolated and hidden yourself because you couldn't seem to shed the extra pounds on your body? Have you tried to do something significant, maybe involving church, work, or school, and things didn't go exactly the way you thought they would, so you gave up? Rather than boldly facing your challenge or setback, did you withdraw in discouragement or hide your failure behind someone else you could blame? Life is challenging, and we have an enemy who tries to stop us cold. But we have to push forward past the challenges. Otherwise, we can become stuck in life, captive to fear, discouragement, and depression, or even to resenting and blaming others. I'm not proud that I had all these emotional challenges to deal with, but I am grateful to God for the deep healing and delivering work He did in my heart as I sought Him honestly for the truth. I share the details of my situation not to embarrass myself, but rather to help you. If you find yourself stuck in life in any way, my prayer is that from my story, you will see the danger in the trap of isolation and avoid that serious pitfall. As time passed during our time of new beginnings in the former Soviet Union, I became more and more isolated and withdrawn, and let me tell you, isolation is a terrible and lonely trap. Everyone needs others to talk to, and that is especially true for women. But I had no one to talk to so that I could be encouraged and strengthened while Rick was away doing the work of the ministry. I couldn't expose the negative parts of my soul, my fears, my resentment, and my pain, because I didn't want to dishonor my husband. So I chose to say nothing. I kept all my feelings to myself, and I thought about them day in and day out, again and again and again.